What is happening? The crazy thing about this slide, this is the Women's March about a year ago. And I sent this deck to Vipe about a week ago, and now this slide is outdated. Those of you that marched last weekend, some of the statistics are calling at least the Washington version the single largest demonstration in recorded U.S. history. That's its own presentation on its own, by itself, but I think this is stunning. This kind of photograph should just shake us in every way. As Vipe said, I was at Surfrider from 2005 to 2015, a decade, and I would suggest that the largest challenge that the Surfrider Foundation and the entire nonprofit community had during that decade was not their core missions. It wasn't ocean acidification, it wasn't shark finning, it wasn't beach access, it wasn't ocean plastics, it was apathy. It was getting people to actually do something. And now that's not the case. And I wouldn't say that it's flipped 180 degrees, but in 2007, if you were an activist, you were Fringe Society. You were a single-digit % of society. People looked at you strange. Who's that oddball standing up for that thing? And now, if you're not advocating and engaged, people look at you strange. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why didn't you show up and march with these kids leading to keep guns out of schools? So there's this giant shift in culture that's happened. I think it's related to this. So the white line is the number of people on the planet. It's pretty linear. There are certain cultures that have a high birth rate, others like Japan and Italy that have negative birth rates. They aren't repopulating themselves. And then the black line, which I've drawn as kind of an oversimplified hockey stick, but it actually has a much higher rise, is the number of internet-connected devices on Earth. And 4 years ago, they equaled each other, and now there's more internet-connected devices on Earth. And it's kind of odd to start a talk like this about Age of Activism, Rise of Brand Citizenship, which I'll define in a bit, and talk about technology, but I think it is a technology story at its core. I think technology is the enabler. You could go back to the Kennedy-Nixon debates, which I wasn't at, or I wasn't around then, but if you read the debates, people said Nixon won, and if you watched them, you saw Kennedy win. And all of a sudden, the dawn of a visual presentation of the tan guy from Boston and the pasty guy from wherever, California, I guess, Yorba Linda, that mattered. And then you fast forward a few years and you have Vietnam, and you have people in the streets. So the proliferation of technology is pushing power into the hands of people and getting them off their butts. In the 70s, it was the mainframe. Everything was centralized. And then Jobs, Gates, Woz, Paul Allen brought us a personal computer in the 80s. And then I think one of the most important years in American history was 1995, the year Netscape went public and brought not the internet, but the web accessibility to basically everything. And then, of course, the iPhone, which no one actually uses as a phone, or few people do. They actually use it for everything else. It's a supercomputer in your pocket, which is enabling this. So I was preparing for a presentation a little while ago, a pitch to Facebook, which is very much in the news for a lot of these issues. And I started Googling and building kind of a timeline of activist movements, corporate scandals, social movements, basically all the things on the right-hand side. And I was plotting them on a time graph. And I didn't include it in this presentation because I didn't want too many charts. But they're all basically happening now. So if you go back to like 2005, okay, there's Enron, and then there was an NSA scandal, then there was WorldCom. But then there was kind of crickets. And I don't know about you, but in the last 36 months, it's just like, oh my God, I almost don't even want to check my phone in the morning, not just for Trump, but for everything. I think when we put the center of gravity of what's happening right now on Trump, we're grossly missing the point. He's a result of this. He's not it. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you were a white supremacist, you couldn't find the 63 other white supremacists within 15 miles. Now you can. And so you can organize and you can do this. The interesting thing about this list is there aren't a lot of ocean movements on this list. And that's a problem. I would posit that, and I'm going to talk about this more as we get into this presentation, the community needs to change its game a little bit. It needs to modernize. So what does this have to do with brands? Well, the kind of simple version is it's where all our money goes. We give a single-digit % to charities of different kinds. We give a little bit more to the government, but we kind of give everything else to brands. And the fascinating part of this is, as you start drilling down into what all those brands are, they're the expected ones, but then there's a bunch of things that are very unexpected. I don't know how many times I'm watching Hulu at night with my wife and I see one more pharmaceutical brand pitching me for some illness that I don't have. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, pharma, biotech, half of their money is going to marketing. Insurance, things that, do you have insurance? Do you not have insurance? That used to be the question. Now it's just like, what brand of insurance? And so all of our money's going here. It's what we tie our identity to. I think sometimes we put consumers in another category other than ourselves. We conveniently see ourselves as environmentalists who aren't consumers. Consumers are the people that shop at H&M, how dare they, etc. And then we, in our Patagonia jacket, which is less than 18 months old, go to the store and buy a 24-ounce craft beer, and we think we're not consumers. We're all consumers. Let's get over that. The question is really, how are you using your money? A dollar is arguably the most malleable, directionable tool on the planet. We're all consumers. It's what we tie our identity to. You are what you wear, you are what you drive, etc. It would be great if culture wasn't that shallow and crass, but it is. It's where our time goes. You know, the fascinating thing here is actually when you get down to the nitty-gritty of this, I reference a Gen Z stat on the back. We're doing a lot of research on Gen Z, which is hard to do because they're just coming of age now and there isn't a lot of data available. But two things popped for me. One is that Gen Z spends over 10 hours a day online, not including homework. That's a lot. They're checking social media more than 100 times a day. And I would also posit that they're not the only ones. A lot of people I know play Words with Friends a lot. They check Facebook and Instagram a lot. And I'll be the first to admit, when I wake up, I grab my phone and I do check Instagram. There are some absolutely amazing things that technology can bring to you, but it is kind of sucking up a lot of our time. And it's where the market's going. There's two statistics that have really caught my eye in the last kind of 60 days, 90 days. This is one of them. BlackRock is the quintessential capitalist entity. Dollar is God. If you make a return, you're good. If you don't, you're bad. And the founder came out about 60 days ago, and he said all 100% of our 6 trillion, which is kind of hard to even get your head around, I'm not sure I have yet, $6 trillion investments in companies must be tied to advancing society or having some social or environmental idea. This is not an early adopter. Kevin Wilden and I were just talking about kind of the adoption curve. This is not an early adopter. This is mainstream. This is a follower. It's where the market's going. So the whole kind of setup is, this is the age of activism. It's enabled by technology. One of the reasons I pointed back to Kennedy and Nixon is I think sometimes the best way to understand the future is to look at the past and try to understand the vector or the directional elements, what's fueling things, so then you have a better idea of what's going to happen in 5, 10 years, or 5 or 10 months. And this is one of those things, brand citizenship. So brand citizenship is not corporate social responsibility. It's not a company saying, let's get our employees together and build bikes for inner city kids. It's not that. It's not greening their supply chain. It's not a lot of the things that happen in corporate social responsibility, which is fantastic. It's just not this. CSR departments are traditionally tiny and tasked with a mission that essentially is close to saving the world. Brand citizenship is about brands. It's about aligning interests on a brand and society, which includes the environment. So I'm gonna just take a couple of minutes and walk through a couple different types and also some plays that I'm calling, in other words, I'm gonna go through a category of most brands that are doing this well fall into these categories. And then the last section is, okay, what exactly are they doing? And by the way, I know your bullshit detectors are redlining. Got it. Mine is too. That's expected. One of my favorite things about the Parkland crew is Emma, the closely cropped young woman from Parkland who has a no BS button, very prominent in every camera shot. So the bullshit detector redlining is kind of accepted and part of this. So the first type of brand citizen are brands that are born this way. Brands like Patagonia are kind of the easy ones, Ben & Jerry's, Tom's, etc. The interesting part of Ben & Jerry's for me is the beginning of a movement is actually really, really hard. The beginning of punk rock was ugly. The beginning of skateboarding, the beginning of the internet. I happened to be at the beginning of a lot of those. And everyone looks romantically back and says, oh my gosh, it was amazing. No, we got our ass kicked for being the first generation of punks. It was not fun. And then, of course, you can buy the punk rock outfit from Volcom. That's not punk rock. I went to Ben & Jerry's a few years after they opened in Vermont, and it was a mess, honestly. It was just a freaking mess. There were two hippies, just like, hey, let's make us stoned and make ice cream. But it was Vermont, so the quintessential kind of Vermont natural connection to the community was there. It was in their DNA. If you go back to the beginning stages of Patagonia, it's the same thing. It's kind of messy, but intentional. One of my favorite truths that I learned it at Surfrider Foundation when Saatchi and Saatchi reached out to us, and they said, yeah, we want to feature Surfrider as a love brand in our book. And I'm like, what's a love brand? And they're like, well, it's a brand that's basically approaching tattoo. It's a brand that people love at a rate above all others. And the interesting thing for me is I'm just like, we don't really do any marketing. That didn't matter. And the point I learned, and it applies here, and it applies to Patagonia, and it applies to a lot of brands in this category. If you stand for something, people, that resonates very deeply, so they value you very highly. Even if you spend $0 on marketing, they'll automatically elevate your status. The counter is super interesting, which is you can spend $1 billion on marketing in a year, and people will undervalue you. That's the era that we're living in right now. It's the tension between those two. And I work on brands that spend $1 billion a year, and it's hard because they don't stand for anything, or they stand for less. This is a counterintuitive thing. So the next one is collaboration. This happened about a year ago when not one brand, but multiple brands, North Face, Patagonia, REI, and others, joined together to essentially take a stand against the state of Utah, and specifically the government there, who was aligning on access to public lands. And they basically just said, we're a financial force here. We're delivering $50 million to the Salt Lake economy, and guess what? We're going to leave. And they said, no, you won't. And they're like, bye. And they left, and they went to Denver. So multiple brands collaborating to drive change. This is actually super hard because it's pretty rare that you have brands that stand for so much of the same thing and are willing to share the stage. A side note on this one, when I came to 72 and Sunny from the nonprofit sector, and specifically from Surfrider, I thought I would kind of be like nonprofit cop, meaning like, okay, you, Tillamook, you partner with them, Target, you partner over here, and just like directional guy. I almost never do that. I almost never connect a brand with a nonprofit, and I'm still trying to really figure that out. It does happen. It happens maybe 30% of the time, but this is part of the reason, is that brands, the timing of campaigns, the definition of success, it's hard to align. The most successful partnership we had at Surfrider under my watch was with Gallo Wine, specifically Barefoot Wine, because we shared the same definition of success. We wanted clean beaches, we wanted to have fun on beaches, and they helped us do that. They helped us do lots and lots of beach cleanups. Another kind of category is right time, right place, ephemeral, sometimes imperfect backstory. The amazing thing about Fearless Girl is that it's a tourist attraction in New York City, which is a city that has a lot of really good tourist attractions. Like the Statue of Liberty. People go there. It's stunning. I get it, like when people talk about Fearless Girl, they instantly want to say, well, what about, isn't that company, that financial company, don't they suck in some way? There's a bad story there somewhere, I know it. And yeah, I think that's the tension here of when you're a brand, you are almost by definition imperfect. I would say the same thing about nonprofits. They just fail to admit it much of the time. But State Street, yeah, they're struggling with diversity, specifically on boards, but that was kind of the point they were trying to make. And the truth is once you put yourself out there, you're a target. The challenging part there is that causes many brands to not put themselves out there and to not take stands because they know they're going to be a target. So right place, right time. Transformation. This is a category of a lot of what I do. I would say 30% of my time works on brands like this. And I am working on Axe out of Amsterdam. Transformations are brands that you would say are not good brands. There are brands that you would say, those are good brands. And the truth is when Patagonia does Worn Wear 3.0 in the buses in Europe, you're like, that's cool. But you kind of expected it. There'll be one in Latin America. You get it. The trajectory's been set for decades. You actually don't expect that for other brands. Like, people could say that Axe was actually one of the brands that screwed up masculinity for a long period of time. And now they're really leaning into the opposite, that if you have gray hair, if you have a big nose, if you're fat, whatever your unique attributes are, that's you, own that, and that's what a modern man is. They're super hard to do, but because of the upside, they're pretty notable. So many times I'll be in a room and I'll be just like, can I just pause for a second? We're actually talking about challenging with the definition of masculinity on the planet. Sometimes the size of the ideas and the money behind them just like make me just like spin. Then there's the mega transformations stacked on top of one another. Unilever is probably one of the biggest, most meaningful business stories of our time, not just for financial reasons, but because of all the reasons that are benefiting society. Are they doing everything right? No. Is any company doing everything right? Of course not. What they're doing is they're systematically understanding that the most valuable brands in the world are those that stand for something legitimately and can point to impact that they've helped enable. And then there's the miss the playbook. You have, if Fearless Girl was right place, right time, this was like wrong place, wrong time. There's 2 points to make on this Pepsi Black Lives Matter piece. The first one is there's the obvious one. Let's throw them under the bus for being this stupid corporate brand that really just messed it up. What scares me about this one is that all of us can do this. All of us live in our bubbles. That was so apparent to me at Surfrider. It was so apparent to me when I was in tech before that, and it's so apparent to me now that I'm in the creative world. We all live in our bubbles, and we don't see it. We see other bubbles. When some tech person comes up to us, we're like, whoa, 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 can you just stop speaking in jargon? They're saying the same thing about you. Could you stop talking with this environmental like shorthand thing? Jargon exists as a shorthand for people within a bubble. If you're speaking jargon, you're in the bubble. If you've been in the bubble for a long time, that's a problem. You should probably find a way to get outside the bubble. Otherwise, this kind of thing happens. So, if those are the various categories, what are the best brands in the world doing in this area? The first one is to connect with people's identity. So we talked about kind of the microbrewery example, which is a crazy phenomenon. The last time there were this many breweries was like when there was, I think, 2,000 breweries in New York City because the water was undrinkable. In the 1800s. And now I live in Solana Beach, a 1 square mile town in San Diego, and we have 3 microbreweries. Just like, that's not counting homebrewers. It's amazing. So be someone. There's an absolute, if you go back to that example of technology enabling you to find, using search to find people that are really specifically, that are embracing sustainable surfboard shaping methods, materials, etc. We all know who each other are. The opportunity is for brands to understand exactly who you're targeting and to get as close as possible. We do a lot of work for 7th Generation. They're taking on federal label disclosure for toxic materials. It's one of my favorite companies in the world. The fascinating backstory of and it points to Maya Rudolph here. The backstory is they were a really boring company. And so what 72 and Sunny did was say, okay, you stand for a lot, but actually you're boring. No one cares, or at least beyond the environmentalists, no one cares. So we brought Maya Rudolph in, and I was going to play one video. But if you do one thing, you should go to YouTube and Google the jingle. It's Maya Rudolph freestyling. She went well off script about toxic materials on feminine care products and bringing kind of deep sustainability meaning with toxicity outside of this product that literally goes inside of a body, and then bringing a cultural figure like that. That's kind of like all the stages of the rocket. You need to not only stand for something, you need to connect. You need to be part of people's identity. By the way, if you want to know one of the best communities in the world, go join Generation Good, especially if you're a mom. hundreds of thousands of people. It's a 7th-gen community. They're not talking about house cleaning products only. It's probably the best corporate, or it's probably the best brand community that I know of. Next, align to a brand's ethos, go deeper to why a company exists. So gender inequality in Silicon Valley, everyone has heard about it. To put some numbers on it, technical jobs across all brands in Silicon Valley of women, the percent of women in technical jobs at Facebook, Google, Snap, et cetera, is in the 20% range, low 20s. So to change that, and the reason to change that is diversity of thought drives innovation. Innovation company, you need diversity of thought. This is not just about do-goodery. It's like, no, this is actually good for us. To change that, you go upstream. The percent of high school girls interested in computer science is 1%. 1. So that's a problem. So you need the biggest stage possible. So this is a 72 and 70 project. We partnered with the White House under Obama. The 56 trees in front of the White House during the national tree lighting ceremony, we covered them in LED lights. We went on the homepage of Google, which has 1 billion uniques, and we invited girls to make beautiful things via coding. And they literally coded the patterns on the trees. We had 1 million girls engage in a week. So that's when you start talking about, okay, this is a brand, it does make sense. If someone said, hey, Google is teaching girls to code these beautiful things, would that make sense to you? Sure, that makes sense. Align to a brand's ethos. Get off the sidelines. I think people are on the bubble on this one. I'm not. I think that it was great for Delta and the other 20 companies to take a stand on this kind of issue. A brand could also take a stand to be pro-NRA. That would be fine with me. I just want to know where you stand. Don't fake it, and don't say that you kind of stand over here, but you kind of also want to be over here. I think a decade ago, the best place to be was in the middle, not taking a stand. I think increasingly that's not the case. Create commercial impact. If Neil Blumenthal pitched anyone here and anyone you know the business plan for Warby Parker, I'm fairly certain you would have said, hell no. If someone came to you and said, I want to take on a monopoly, Luxottica, who not only owns eyeglasses, sunglasses, eye care, I want to take on a monopoly in an industry where the last technological innovation was centuries ago. You'd be like, dude, no way. There's just no way. Warby Parker's worth $1 billion. The reason that they did is they connected social impact. 2 pieces of plastic, this pair of glasses and this pair of glasses. They made them look roughly the same. The Warby Parker does some good, gives eye care to people, and all of a sudden you're just like, oh, yeah, that does make sense. I'll do that. The point here is that it's aligned to the business model. It's aligning the interests, and that's how things scale. Innovate or die. If brands don't innovate, they die. They actually cease to exist. I like that. I like it because it's clear. So this is Google. All tech is having a really hard time right now. Some would argue that it's deserved. Some would argue that it's not deserved. This is an example of Google trying to lean into issues, specifically in the Bay Area, and putting the power of directing their money in the hands of the locals. So we turned digital bus signs literally into voting booths. People could literally walk up to a bus sign and direct funds. There was $5 million being directed, so it was a fair amount of money being directed by random people. You didn't need a computer, you didn't need to be a geek, you didn't need to work at Facebook, you just needed to be in the city. The layer behind this was even wilder. If you walked into a coffee shop, you could actually vote by pressing a paper version of this. We had a digital paper version. You could literally walk up and say, I think Habitat for Humanity, Tenderloin, I'm making that up, should get the money. And the vote was counted. So all of a sudden, it democratized the participation of shifting kind of the social fabric in a way. Innovate or die. Use scale. Embrace the unique role a brand can play. I adore this idea. This is another one that 72 did. This one just, this is a beautiful story. So Syrian refugees are streaming across into Europe. 1 million refugees were hitting Germany. There were 3 languages involved that were kind of at the essence of bringing people into society: Arabic, Farsi, and German. All pretty complicated languages for anyone that speaks those. So people were refugees, German citizens. A lot of people were just like, how do we communicate with these people? We just don't even know what to say. We don't know any, the characters are different. It's wild. So rather than punt this back to Menlo Park, Google said, okay, Europe, specifically Germans, can you help? So they literally pushed this out, and they enabled citizens to fine-tune Google Translate between those 3 languages, which up to that point had never really been a thing. So all of a sudden you've got this spike in interest on something that didn't really exist before, and Google enabled everyone to plug in and play. Another one is come alongside culture. Don't take. This is super new. Like last week, I think, when H&M tried to basically rip off a graffiti artist without permission, and all of a sudden there was a huge backlash, not only in the graffiti community, but all the people that they could influence, which turns out is pretty big. We'll punish you, right? I mean, citizens used to kind of be namby-pamby. We're not anymore. We're all activists. We march. We're kind of badasses, right? I mean, it's a new thing. I think we're all still getting used to it. But when you see kids on stage throwing up out of like the emotional, gut-wrenching topics, we're all in. We're right behind them. So don't mess with us. On that same trajectory, benefit society, our bullshit detectors are tuned. We're not kind to fakes. What I love about that, and I absolutely adore that, is that it makes all the innovation better, faster, stronger. And I do think, to be critical for a moment, I do think that the nonprofit sector, ocean innovation space, needs that same pressure. One of the challenges that I've seen in nonprofits that I've started, that I've been on the board of, that I've run, is that it's actually easy to not die. It's easy to be one more day, and another day, and another day, and a decade, and 2 decades. And one of the things I love about the commercial sector is it's just brutal. And I think we should all try to have a gut check on that. What are we doing differently that's taking some of these ideas and connecting with people at the identity level so that they will march? IKEA is one of my favorite companies in the world. I really didn't know that much about them until a year or so ago. This is one of the things they made. It's a flat pack refugee shelter. Not perfect. Anyone could throw arrows at it. They're trying to help the Syrian refugees. They sold 10,000 to the United Nations. It's a fascinating case study. Anchor in behavior. I think this is another thing that companies like 72 and Sunny and the entire advertising and creative world are trying to get their heads around. It used to be that you could talk and people would listen. That's not the case anymore. We actually want you to shift behavior. Facebook, which is in the crosshairs so much these days, has done a number of things that are really notable. One, they've connected 2 billion people on Earth to each other. That's kind of good. most days. This is, shootings in Las Vegas, a lot of the shootings, people are using Safety Check to basically check themselves in and say, I'm alive, I'm good. This is my second to last slide, deliver over the long term. I actually had a personal goal of doing this entire presentation and not talking about Patagonia. It's kind of hard. The point here is if you're going to deliver a narrative, don't make it a short story, don't make it a little while tale, don't make it a 30-second or a 6-second commercial. Camp there for a long period of time and find ways to innovate. And the one thing, God love them, that they do well is they're just freaking on message. I would argue they make a lot of mistakes, but they're on message. And they're like right down the middle, and you know where they stand. And they do it for a long period of time. And Warren Ware and their repair facility in Nevada is absolutely stunning leadership. It's amazing that a brand could be mocked as Patagucci and have their initiatives trying to make the most notable version of it the patched version, the crappy version, the version that's been run over by a car, fell off a cliff, done whatever, but patched. There's an amazing juxtaposition there. I'm still trying to figure it out. And that is it. So these are the things that, leaving the nonprofit sector, leaving activism, and then going straight into kind of the belly of the beast, these are the things that I see are the most notable around the world that brands are doing. They're aligning to who they are, they're finding out who they are, and they're sticking to that thing. They're getting off the sidelines, they're creating commercial impact, they're aligning to the business, thus it's sustainable, thus it scales. They know if they don't innovate, they're going to die. They lean into their scale, they come alongside culture, they legitimately benefit society, knowing that everyone in the world is their critic, and vocally their critic. They're anchored in behavior, and they deliver over the long term. That's it. Thank you.